Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another enlightening Schemel Forum. In the U.S., the scourge of gun violence continues to make headlines, leaving many of us grappling with the depth and implications of this crisis. But what if the very headlines and reports we consume play a role in shaping this narrative? What if a change in reporting could prevent future tragedies? It's my privilege to introduce Jim MacMillan, a seasoned journalist, educator, and social innovator. As director of the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting and assistant director of the Logan Center for Urban Investigative Reporting at Temple University, Jim and his team are examining how journalistic practices could impact real-world outcomes. Jim's insights challenge us to consider the power and responsibility of media in the face of this nationwide plight. Please help me welcome Jim MacMillan so that he can share his insights on gun violence prevention and the critical role of the media. Jim? Sorry about that. There you go.
Fantastic. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, first of all, thank you, Dean Alessio, for this invitation. I'm honored and delighted to be here back in Northeast Pennsylvania. I'd like to thank Brooke Leonard, if she's around here, who's been very helpful with me preparing, everybody else on the staff, and especially all of you who decided to spend some of your time with us today. I need the keyboard to continue. Okay, so I decided to start by showing you I don't talk about, let me frame it first. I don't talk about myself a lot. In general, I'm more excited about sharing things I've learned and most excited about raising the voices of others in my work. People that don't always, to shift power to people who have important things to say but don't always have the power. But I thought to frame today, maybe I'd show you a few photos that are a little more about me and where I come from that kind of set up how I got here and what I'm doing. So the first one, obviously, yesterday was the 22nd anniversary of September 11th, and I'm showing you this photo for three reasons. First of all, to honor those lost, to commemorate the anniversary. Also, it's a glimpse into my work. I took this photo actually on at dawn on the morning of September 12th, 22 years ago today. It was you couldn't see much on the 11th. And the third reason was for comparison, because this is Philadelphia, where the city launched an open data set tracking people, shooting victims, firearm injured patients, people who were shot by other people in interpersonal community gun violence in Philadelphia, beginning on New Year's Day 2015. And since then, more than 3,000 people have been killed by gunfire in Philadelphia. Nearly 15,000 people have been killed altogether. Comparatively, nearly 3,000 people were killed in 9/11. And what happened? The U.S. launched a new cabinet-level department, invaded two sovereign nations, got into trillion-dollar wars, the longest war in our nation's history. And I'm not here to judge any of that. But comparatively, what have we done about gun violence? Not so much, right? It's certainly nothing in comparison. And just to zoom in, literally zoom in a little bit, this is one of the, because you can't see all the dots on that map because there are so many. This is one neighborhood, one of the most distressed neighborhoods, to be fair, K&A or Kensington and Allegheny. But this is a neighborhood, like most of the city, full of residences. These blocks have a couple of dozen row houses, mostly occupied, where families go about their lives. And these are the shooting victims in that neighborhood. Just since 2015, the red dots represent fatalities and the yellow dots, non-fatal shootings. Just imagine living with this. This is from the same data set. We have this dashboard at the bottom of our homepage at the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting. I'd like to point out a few things. First, in the top left, and this is as of September 7th. On the top left, you can see we're approaching 15,000 total victims since January 2015. On the top right, however, there are some signs of hope. On the top right, you can see that we have 1,256 year-to-date victims in 2023, but down 25% from last year. So progress is good, but if you look at the rolling shooting victims over the past 365 days, that's a total number. So each point in the timeline is the number of victims shot during the past year, and you can see the spike during the pandemic when shooting victims more than doubled in Philadelphia. And by the way, whatever you think the right response is, nothing else doubled. Surgeons and ERs didn't double, police didn't double, social services didn't double. Nothing else doubled to meet the need. So some steps have been taken since, and nobody really, I think, has the authority to say exactly why, but we're making some progress, and this is actually the trend in most American cities this year. There are a couple of important exceptions, but 6 months into the year, I saw that shootings were down 12%, or gun violence was down 12% across the U.S. In 2023. So we're making some progress. But I want to stop here, because, of course, they're not just numbers, right? It's important to look at the numbers to assess the problem and address the problem. But we're talking about people. We're talking about fathers, sons, sisters, brothers, mothers, daughters, everybody. I've seen a study that showed, that's not true. I'm aware of a study underway in another city indicating that there are 10 co-victims for each shooting victim. For everybody who gets shot, there are 10 people whose lives are really disrupted by that. So in Philadelphia, with 15,000 people shot, and by the way, this has been a crisis since the 80s, but with 15,000 people shot, we can estimate 150,000 co-victims since 2015 alone. So I'd like to take a moment, and why not today? Let's take a moment for the victims of September 11th, and remember them, and for the victims of gun violence in Philadelphia and across the U.S. Thank you. I never know how long to go. It's never long enough, but I think it's important. Continuing, here's another photo that I took, and I'm showing this to you for a different reason. It's not related to American gun violence. However, I spent a year in 2004, 2005 reporting on the war in Iraq for the Associated Press. And this is important to explain how I got here. I was a local news photographer. I was a guy with a police scanner in the car in Boston and in Philadelphia, and a few years that I worked in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I'll get to that. And I covered what spot news photographers do. It's mostly fires and accidents, and in cities like Philadelphia, it's a great deal of gun violence. But I went to Iraq. I spent a year. I got to really touch the top. I got to work with the greatest photojournalists in the country for a year. And at the end of this, we were honored with a Pulitzer Prize for breaking news photography. This is one of my photos in the portfolio. There were 11 photographers. There were 5 Iraqis and photographers from around the world, and I think 3 Americans represented in the portfolio. And the reason I want to bring this up is to explain how I got here, because since then my life has been filled with faculty appointments and residencies and fellowships, and that's true. And I've worked hard. But that's not who I am. That's just not who I am. I'm a laborer. I have been all my life. I'm from humble roots. My first job was in an industrial kitchen where thousands of dirty dishes came at me every day. And then I worked in a kennel with a shovel. And then I was a bar back and a bouncer. And then I worked at a newspaper. And I wound up in photography. I could as well have wound up on the loading dock or in the press room. And a few other things led me toward photography. I don't want to lie about that, but I would have been that hard-working guy in the street doing the news photography, and nothing would have changed if it hadn't been for this moment in Iraq. And I respect that work as well, of course. But what does it say outside to those who great things are given, or opportunity? I saw a quote on the way in, and basically what I'm saying, forgive me for poorly paraphrasing it, but I've had a great deal of opportunity. Everything I do now is to honor that opportunity. I feel this incredible responsibility to take all of these opportunities I've had and make good on it. At the same time, I've learned that third thing I did. So I covered 9/11. I covered Iraq. I covered national disaster. I covered Katrina and extreme weather. But I spent a lot of time on the breaking news beat and on the crime beat. And I've learned that a lot of the work that I was doing was harmful. I didn't have all the information. I worked hard because I cared, because I thought I was providing the best public service possible. I was proud of it. But we have more information now, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, briefly on a lighter note, yes, 35 years ago I came to join the staff of the Wilkes-Barre Times-Leader. For those to whom it might be important, this was after the famous strike of the decade before. This is me at the Lackawanna County Multi-Purpose Stadium. I think of the first year of covering the Red Barons. You can see my excitement. I can't believe it's been so long, and I still have friends up here. I've just got a couple more photos from that era. I cover the air show every year. There was a press day where I got to fly. My judgment was different when I was younger. I got to fly with aerobatics teams, and people didn't take selfies back then, and it was not easy taking a selfie with a professional camera without being able to see into it while flying upside down. But I'm so glad that I recorded this, and I leapt at this assignment every year. Sadly, I don't have a single photo that I could find from when I worked for the Times Leader, because I recently had the opportunity to donate all of my prints to the Charles the Charles Library at Temple University, which is pretty exciting in itself. But I did find this slide from one Times Leader assignment. In 1988, the National Geographic had just done a whole issue on the Mississippi River, and a photographer traveled from end to end. So every newspaper in the country that had a river in their city had a photographer travel from end to end, and I got to tell the story of the Susquehanna River from where it begins up in Cooperstown, New York, near the Baseball Hall of Fame, to where it lets out into Chesapeake Bay. And this is a photo of a Harrisburg Senators game in City Island, in the middle of not quite in the middle, but in the Susquehanna River. So that's my one photo from back then. But back to work. As Dean Alessio introduced this whole talk, what if? This was the question on my mind 5 years ago. I left a staff position at the College of Media and Communication at Temple to return to this work because I'd done this other gun violence reporting before. What if changing the way journalists cover gun violence could prevent shootings and save lives? This has grown out of my interest and my opportunity to study and teach and try to practice disciplines within journalism, of trauma-informed journalism, of solutions journalism, of peace journalism, and bring these things together to see if reporting could actually prevent violence. I landed a fellowship at the University of Missouri's Reynolds Journalism Institute, and my proposal had 3 parts: to host a national convention on the topic of better gun violence reporting in Philadelphia, to create a preliminary set of best practices for reporting on gun violence with those experts, and then to create an enduring institution. And that's what I hope the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting will be, although that enduring part, it turns out, is really hard, but we're making good progress. The first thing I did was to organize this. We call it a Community Conversations Day, bringing people with lived experience in Philadelphia from my own violence prevention network, from other work I do, and journalists from my work in the media in Philadelphia, to get together and talk about what better gun violence reporting might look like. Then we had the Better Gun Violence Reporting Summit, that national conference at WHYY Public Media in Philadelphia. Now remember, this was an idea that I had. This was a fellowship pitch. I didn't know how it would go. 250 people registered, from the New York Times to the LA Times, from Boston to Orlando, and other sorts of media too. From small cities like Atlantic City and Allentown and Flint, from other sorts of media, digital first media, community media, ethnic media, freelancers, students, whoever I'm forgetting. The energy was, and doctors. The energy was incredible, and sort of a proof of concept for the work I've been doing since then. And here is a glance at that set of best practices produced from so that day on the stage, we had researchers from criminal justice, criminology, public health, science communications, journalism, epidemiology, and maybe forgetting others. And we had journalists who cover gun violence locally in Philadelphia and nationally. And we had community representatives, again, from my network in Philadelphia. You can find this on our initial homepage. ibgvr.org is the Initiative for Better Gun Violence Reporting. That was my fellowship site, basically. And you can open up each of these carrots and read a lot more underneath them. So this was gleaned from the speakers on the stage, from the Q&As, from the social media conversations, and other things I'm probably forgetting. Now we're working on a more comprehensive, more advanced set of best practices, and I'll get back to that later. So in July of 2020, that summer, right, a complicated time, I launched the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting. We have 150 people working with us now. It was just, when I say I launched it was just me, and they extended my fellowship a little bit into the summer. But my primary partner on this work since 2018 is Dr. Jessica Beard. Dr. Beard is a trauma surgeon at Temple University Hospital in Philadelphia, in North Philadelphia. It's situated between the two neighborhoods with the most gun violence in the city, gets the most gun violence or in her language, firearm injured patients of any hospital in Pennsylvania, and I think maybe in the US. And what I've learned through all of this work is when you're a trauma surgeon in an American city now, you're basically a gunshot wound surgeon. I don't know that she'd agree with my terminology, but that's what they do. And she's brilliant. Hopefully, right? The doctors I get to work with are a whole lot smarter than me and most normal people. And she's outspoken and she's bold and she's brave. So this is the screen from a recent podcast, the It's All Journalism podcast, where she details how media reporting is harmful, and I'm going to get into that some more. And she's incredibly generous. She does so much media for us. And this is randomly. I've learned that trauma surgeons typically spend, I work hard, maybe you work hard. They typically spend more than 100 hours a week at the hospital. They spend their clinical time and their on-call time and their research time and their administrative time. And she still finds time to do media hits to advance our work, which is just priceless. We've got 4 staffers at the center. We're all part-timers. There's me, there's Dr. Beard, who is, half of her time is supported by a Stoneleigh Foundation fellowship. The other 2 are Maxine Gooden, who's in the middle here in the multicolored dress, and over her shoulder, Aronde McLean, who is in the orange shirt. Maxine is a co-victim. She lost her son to gun violence. His name is Jason, about 5 years ago. They're from Philly. He was killed in Harrisburg. That doesn't really matter. He was killed by somebody he met that day at a party who got angry and had a gun. Aronde is superhuman. Aronde was shot in the head with a stray bullet when he was 10 years old and had a very long recovery. And they're both just so brave and so many, and these are some of our other credible messengers. I'll talk about that, our community reporters. But they're brave and they're strong and they give me so much strength. Maxine was the first participant in the Credible Messenger Reporting Project. This is our community reporting project. We pair people with extensive lived experience like Maxine. So before we hired her, she came to us through this project. We pair them with professional journalists. In this case, it was a recently retired Philadelphia Inquirer reporter to combine share their combined expertise to report on root causes, lived experiences, and possible solutions, but from the community perspective. And Maxine actually completed the very first project with us, and then we hired her. She's now our Credible Messenger community manager, and she helps new Credible Messenger teams through some of the hurdles they face. She also held, and this was beyond the support that we provide. So we provide support for these teams. I raise money, and the center distributes it through a committee. And she also, but beyond the support we gave her, she also held a number of community screenings with conversations that have become the model for all that we do. And she's, and this is one where we were covered by a local news station. She was doing the work here. I was in the audience, but her extra effort was covered in a local news report. Dr. Dorothy Johnson-Spite is the leader of Mothers in Charge. It's probably, in my biased opinion, the city's leading gun violence prevention community. Biased because I volunteered there for 13 years. I've covered them for 10 before that, and I've been on the board for 5 or 6 or 7. And she assembled a panel of all moms who'd lost their children to gun violence for this video. So she participated in the project as well. Stronger Every Day is very meta, as the young people say. This was a story of Walter Willis on your right. Walter he didn't make the news. On New Year's Eve about 5 years ago, he was on the way to do an errand going to, I think, a CVS, and got robbed and shot in the back. And it didn't seem especially newsworthy. But the bullet tore through all of his systems. It took 30 operations to save him. Coincidentally, Dr. Beard, well, not coincidentally, she does a lot of this, but Dr. Beard happened to be in service at the time when Walter arrived at the ER, and she performed all of the operations. So in this case, Walter's mom, Tashawn, pictured here, is the Credible Messenger journalist. The professional partners were a podcast team called Kuvenda in Philadelphia, and the people that Tashawn interviewed included Walter and Dr. Beard and another woman in their family, and maybe I'm forgetting another. But the incredible, and I don't want to paint too rosy a picture, the incredible thing here is that for 2 years after the shooting, Walter wasn't speaking. It's still not clear to me if it was neurological damage or a traumatic response or why, but the partial miracle is that through this process of telling the story, he started speaking again. But I don't want to paint a simple picture. His life remains incredibly complicated because he was shot. Arande, this is back to Arande. Again, so he's now our Credible Messenger newsroom liaison. He raises the voice of other survivors in the newsroom, other survivors and co-victims working with local news organizations. He also came to us in the Credible Messenger project. His documentary is called They Don't Care About Us, or Do They? I could talk about that forever. He's written about it. You can find it on our homepage. But the incredible thing is he interviewed other survivors, and he found this young man, Samaj Obranti. Samaj is, I think, 14 now, maybe 13 when he was interviewed, and was 10 years old when he was shot in the head by a stray bullet, just like Arande. And the integrity of this interview, of an interviewer and a young survivor with the same story, is just something you've got to behold. And to be honest, right, these are community produced videos. They can get a little technically a little weaker and stronger in some parts, but this interview is so real. Like when they both talk about why Samaj is wearing a hoodie, they both feel or felt at some point embarrassed by the gunshot wounds in their heads. So we're still in touch with Samaj, as you might imagine. I meant to bring that picture up while I was telling you the second part. Arande had a screening of his Credible Messenger project, and there are two things to take away here. Being the hero that he is, he also gave awards to everybody that he works with, survivors, co-victims, and honored them during his screening. But I think the most important thing here is the bottom picture, because that's where because we're coming out of a pandemic, right? We were virtual in this operation first, but we got to see an audience of people with lived experience see their kind of story on the big screen, told by people like them, controlled with narrative control by Arande, somebody like them was the producer and director and narrator. So the power of this sort of storytelling this is where the solutions are. I'll just leave it there. Whoops, wrong way. Okay, so moving forward, I think I'm already running late, so I'm going to cut a few corners. This is our Credible Messenger link-up session. This is a networking session where we recruit credible messengers and journalists. We did this at Temple University. This is our first one in person last spring. And there's just so much energy at everything we do. This is our second Credible Messenger Film Festival, where we show the videos produced in our project. This was at Klein College at Temple University just a couple of months ago. And you can see MacMillan and Arande were hosting it in the middle there. And some local journalists participated, and I could go on all day about every one of these events, but I have to keep moving. This is our first film festival in a smaller venue a year earlier. Just so much emotion in all of this. Okay, I'm going to boast for a minute. The Pen and Pencil Club is one of the nation's oldest press clubs. It's Philadelphia's press club, and they gave our center their award for non-traditional news provider of the year last January. And what's important here, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to talk about our research collaborative, I'm going to talk about our professional development work, but the only reporting we do is the community reporting. So this was an incredible honor. These are a couple of a woman who identifies as POC and another woman named Kim Kamara, other credible messengers in our project who went to pick up the plaque. So what's wrong with news reporting? And if you ask me, I'd say, how much time do you have? But here's one example, and it's kind of a cheap shot, except I can do it all the time. There was a mass shooting in Philadelphia just a month or 6 weeks ago, where I think it turned out to be 8 people shot in the end. And there were lots of reasons why it's confusing trying to count victims. Sometimes it turns out that people caught other sorts of shrapnel, glass or something had bloody wounds that they weren't shot. But why report? Why is it okay to get it so wrong? So 24 hours later, I found 3 prominent Philadelphia news organizations, all of whom are people who do great work, by the way. But this is what's wrong. When reporting on incidents, they get it wrong all the time, and that hurts people. That re-traumatizes people. And if you think about it for comparison, they don't get the Philly score wrong. They all have the same weather data. They all have the same stock market report. There's no excuse for this. It's a mess because everyone's okay with it, good enough. And it's not good enough. Part of the problem is that police information doesn't work. I'm not going to get into that. There's been police misinformation. There are police agendas. I'm sure everybody has the best of intention, but I'm not even here for that. The point is the system doesn't work where journalists go for police for information. If they went for them for the Philly score and got it all wrong, I think they'd fix it. But the system doesn't work. So one of the ways we decided to address this was we're especially concerned with what we call episodic gun violence reporting. Like I said, there's lots of great journalists and lots of doing great reporting on solutions and more. But this thing, the drumbeat you get in Philadelphia and most American cities every night, the same report over and over. An 18-year-old male was shot at the corner of this and that and rushed to some hospital in whatever condition, and we're never going to follow up. That's what we're talking about. So Dr. Beard has organized an interdisciplinary research collaborative to address this. We published our first study. We have 7 more in progress. And this is one of a shot from one of the research meetings, because we didn't do much in person. This was our first in-person research meeting maybe a year ago. And this is the study we published in January. It, Like I'm a Nobody, Firearm Injured People's Perspectives and News Media Reporting About Firearm Violence. It was published in Social Science and Medicine, Qualitative Research and Health. And our research team interviewed 26 firearm injured patients at Temple University Hospital. People whose lives had already been saved, who had recovered enough to go home, and then returned for clinical care, were then invited to opt into research interviews and talk about their feelings on the way incidents are reported in the news and in the way their case is reported in the news. What our researchers learned, is that, well, it wasn't good. That the news reporting left them feeling scared, hopeless, and dehumanized. That it did harm to their reputation because police treat almost everybody as a suspect. Even when they highlight an innocent victim, it frames everybody else as a suspect. So it did harms to their reputation. They felt like it put them actually in physical danger when news reports said they were rushed to Temple or whatever hospital. Because what if the killer came back to finish them off? And I don't know how often that's a reasonable threat, but there was a double shooting in the ambulance bay at Temple a couple of months ago. So it's not a ridiculous concern. They didn't report any positive benefits to this. I feel like I'm forgetting other flaws, but they were re-traumatized by the news, harm to reputation, all the things like that. And they saw no positive benefit to this sort of reporting. Half of them found that their story wasn't reported in the news, which tracks with some other research I got to do with Dr. Beard and her team before we launched the center, actually. And but probably most importantly, not one of them had been contacted by a journalist. So that they don't get to tell their story. The story is out of their control. It's about them without them, which is a pretty hot button topic in the community. This is Dr. Jennifer Midbury. Professor Midbury is a journalism professor at Lehigh. Like me, was a Philadelphia news photographer about 25 years ago. And unlike me, she's smarter than me. She spotted it first. She looked at what we're doing and said, "Hey, are we doing this right? Could this be harmful?" And I had these doubts too, but she's been much more of a leader. So she's our journalism research advisor, and so this is just a glance at our collaborative. It's incredible. We now have primary investigators at a dozen at 7 universities. And 14 research assistants. I'm probably not up to date, probably more by now, working at 7 universities on other studies that we have underway. This is so we do a great deal of outreach. This is Dr. Beard visiting the Association of Healthcare Journalists. They had a conference on the topic in Chicago last fall. And like I said, she's incredibly generous with her time, and I'm going to get into some other we went to. But in terms of outreach, that was last year. But so far this year, we've visited with all of these organizations. Some of these are virtual visits, but they're almost all. They're increasingly more and more of these were in person. And I have today. This is a slide from a couple of weeks ago, but including my visit today. And we also have new visits coming up at Penn and at Jefferson and at Tufts and at Washington and Lee University, which you saw was one of our research partners. So we have the Community Reporting Project, we have the Research Collaborative, and we have our third program we call Better Gun Violence Reporting. That's a professional development program for journalists already reporting on gun violence. Journalists who, like me, are very often reporting on communities that they're not connected to, that they're not from, that they don't really always understand. But they have the power, they're in control of the narrative, and they want to do better. And so what we do is we help connect them with the community to build relationships and to earn trust and to get a better understanding of the problem and the solutions. This is actually a photo from the summit, but last fall we had our first Better Gun Violence Reporting workshop in Philadelphia. This is our keynoter and our host, and I only have a picture of them because we did it under Chatham House rules, like sort of anonymous. but somebody participated from literally every news organization in Philadelphia, big and small, 4 TV stations, public media, the Inquirer, which the old newspaper company, which is a multimedia company, and everyone. And the energy, the enthusiasm, the hunger, the desire for better reporting is just through the roof. Just a few weeks ago, we had a panel at the Online News Association Major Journalism Conference, happened to be meeting in Philadelphia, so we poured a lot of resources into it. There you see Dr. Beard, but left to right, Tyreek Glasgow is a community leader who runs an organization called the Young Chances Foundation. He was a CNN hero, like a finalist, but like a sort of regional CNN hero last year. Yvonne Laddie is the director of the Logan Center, who I work with again now. Yvonne and I she was a reporter when I was a Daily News photographer 30 years ago. And then she ran a graduate program at NYU journalism for 15 years and invited me to teach with her for a year once. And now we're reconnected together again. But she took this job a year ago, and we've been partnering on a lot of things since then. And then the last guy in the row here, Mensa Dean, is working for The Trace. He's based in Philadelphia. If you haven't seen The Trace, it's digital first, the only national news organization focused entirely on gun violence and prevention in America. Mensa also worked at the Philadelphia Daily News and Inquirer. So Yvonne and Mensa and I were all working together in the 90s, and here we are together again. The moderator mentioned at the bottom there, Sarah Glover, is the vice president for news and civic dialogue at WHYY, and coincidentally was a photojournalist. She worked at the Inquirer when Midbury and I worked at the Daily News. So we've got we've got like centuries of experience on this team. It's pretty incredible. Before the O&A conference, and again, just to show the energy, so this is inside the press club, the Pen and Pencil where we got the award. It's not the National Press Club. It's not fancy. It's a row house tavern on Alley Street in Center City. But we decided to have a reception on the night before our O&A panel, and 1,500 people came to O&A, and 100 of them came to our reception. So again, just another sense of the appetite for change in journalism. This is the O&A panel. All the people that I introduced already. You see Dr. Beard and Mensa and Yvonne and Sarah and Tyreek. But again, we had the signal here. We had 80 people in the room. There were a bunch of competing sessions at this conference. We had 80 people in the room, and we ran 20 minutes over without anybody getting restless, because they had so many questions. I know I have to keep time for questions today. And this is not quite a happy ending, but a happy next step. I'm very proud of what I'm about to tell you. So Deshaun Walker, who I've hardly gotten to know yet, but Deshaun Walker he's from West Philadelphia, already had a scholarship. He was a high school senior with a scholarship to Shippensburg University. He's a good kid. And he got shot 10 times in an incident in February. Somehow managed to get it together and graduate from high school. Again, these survivors are superhuman. And then I spotted this story in the news, and from the Philadelphia Inquirer, I know both of the people on the byline there. Jessica Griffin, the second one, is the photographer and one of my best friends. But that led me to look into the story a little more. But what happened was he was banned from his prom and his graduation by his principal because, now get this, does it sound familiar? Because she heard on the news that police said that he was targeted. So his fate is in the hands of the police narrative and the news narrative. What if she heard? And anyway, you can see I get a little charged up about this, but at the same time, this really great thing happened. The Lenfest Institute for Journalism has given us a few dollars to hire an intern during our first 2 summers. I was looking for the right candidate. Rondé, meanwhile, I said, "Hey, Rondé, what do you think? What about this guy? He's going to college. We usually have interns that are already like halfway through college." And Rondé, of course, being the work machine that he is, says, "Oh yeah, I've been visiting Deshaun every day." So we had a line open to Deshaun, and he's presently our fall intern at the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting. He's our associate newsroom liaison. He reports to Rondé. He works with Rondé. They were at Fox 29 in Philadelphia together yesterday. They were on NBC. It's on our top of our homepage. They were both interviewed by NBC 10 in Philadelphia. It was I don't know when they were interviewed, but it aired a few days ago. Okay, briefly, I'm getting toward the end. I'm almost on schedule. This is great. So now I've taken this position back at the Logan Center with Yvonne. It's going to be challenging for me because, in my view, it's going to strengthen the Center for Gun Violence Reporting in several ways. One is that it actually helped stabilize PCGVR by stabilizing me. I've only been taking a subtle, I've only been taking a modest stipend for several years, so I have a job again. But it also, Yvonne and I have been working on so many things together, a podcast, a documentary, events, panels for the past year. It's going to ramp up that collaboration and ramp up our impact and our influence with these two centers working together. And then the third thing is, my plan always, by the way, was to launch the center and transition to more proximate leadership, to the right kind of leader, the perfect leader who has all of the authority and some of the authority I don't have in the community, right? So it will help me expedite it's still going to be a long process. I'm not stepping away quickly, but it will help me expedite succession at PCGVR to a long-term leader. Because this problem is, by the way, this problem is going to take longer than I have. I've been joking for 5 years that I have a 5-year retirement plan, and it never turns into 4. And maybe it just turned into 4. This is another page from the Logan Center site and some of the projects underway. But I want to talk about the one in the middle, stop and frisk, an examination of the harmful, illegal, and ineffective police tactic of randomly stopping people with no probable cause, and the racist application of that tactic, which has been documented in Philadelphia and other cities and banned by the Supreme Court, but still practiced in a way. And brought back by the New York mayor and maybe the incoming Philadelphia mayor. And this podcast was critical and incredible. I played the smallest role. I introduced the two co-producers who are also the co-hosts, Yvonne and a reporter at WHYY, Sammy Kayola. And I might have helped them find some of the community experts, but I did none of the heavy lifting, none of the hard work. But even the slight association is one of the things I'm most proud of, because it was just recognized a couple of weeks ago with the National Mother Award, the highest honor in broadcast journalism, the Pulitzer Prize of broadcast journalism. So Yvonne and the Logan Center are off to a good start, and I'm pretty excited about joining them. So that's, I'm a little ahead of schedule, surprisingly. So I think that's good. I could do 2 things. As long as I'm ahead of schedule, I'm going to do the one that I wasn't sure I'd have time for. I want to save plenty of time for questions and answers. But one of the things, I was going to say Yvonne and I are working on, but she's doing all the work. But one of the things I've been leaning in on is that Yvonne has been producing a documentary called The Second Trauma. It will be coming out soon, focused on the harmful effects of reporting on gun violence. Most of the interviews are with survivors and co-victims. It's hosted by her co-producer, Aronde McLean. So that's my role in the partnership, is making room for Aronde. But that's it, and a few other things, but the small things. But I'm going to show a segment that is an interview with Dr. Beard. It's going to repeat some of the things I said, but probably with a little more scientific precision and authority. So here I go. So I have to figure out how to quit on a PC. So sorry. We talked about everything, but and this gets us to our homepage if you're interested. But I'll help you with that as well. Yeah, why don't you help me find the video? Thank you. Brooke has been solved every problem I came up with in the past month, right up until this moment. So here's
every
the second
survivor
problem.
hurts. They hurt.
They didn't ask me any questions. There was no calls made to me or talk to me personally. They didn't tell the story from my perspective. It was like she was shot and that's it. I'd prefer if they asked me specific feelings about me, if they actually interviewed me, instead of just writing it like I'm a nobody.
You play back the incident, but when you're looking at the news reports, sometimes it makes you frustrated because the news doesn't always have the right information.
You report the gun violence, but why not do a follow-up report for the victims, the survivors, the families that had to bury these people, the whole process? Just don't do a guy got shot over there, a guy got shot over here. You're making people more fearful. You're more fearful, you're going to harm yourself more.
I'm Dr. Jessica Beard. I'm a trauma surgeon at Temple University Hospital. I'm also the director of research at the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting, and I'm a fellow at the Stone Lee Foundation. As a trauma surgeon at Temple, which is the busiest trauma center in the state of Pennsylvania that treats gunshot wounds, I take care of a firearm injured person every time that I'm on call. Sometimes I have to do surgery to save the life of somebody who's injured by a gun. Sometimes it means I have to tell a mom that she's lost her son. Sometimes it means I have to tell a young man that he's never gonna walk again. I first became interested in how the media tells the stories of gun violence really through my own experiences of trying to look up stories about my patients and finding either nothing or what I later learned was episodic crime reporting. A story that follows the same narrative every time, something like 26-year-old man shot on Broad and Tioga. He was transported to Temple Hospital. Police have no motives and there are no arrests. And I thought, wow, that is not the experience of gun violence. That's not my patient's experience. And that led me to want to learn more and to learn about the perspectives of firearm injured people. The study showed that people who've been injured by firearms and who survive their injuries have a lot of negative effects from media reporting on their injuries. About half of the people we interviewed saw a report on their injury. So that means that the other half of people didn't see any reports on their injuries. For those people, they actually mostly felt relieved that they didn't make the news because they didn't want themselves or their injuries exposed, and they didn't want to have the harms to their reputation that may come with reports on their injuries. For the people who did make the news, they felt dehumanized. They felt distress related to inaccuracies that were in the reports. For people whose reports included graphic images of the shooting, those people experienced reliving of trauma. And then more generally, several of the participants described how the current media narrative on gun violence in Philadelphia may be actually making the problem worse and could be leading to increased gun violence. One very notable finding of this study is that not one of our participants was approached by a journalist to tell their story. The perspectives of firearm injured people, survivors of firearm violence, and their families need to be included in the stories of gun violence so that people can see the human side of firearm injury in our city. The other thing that participants in our study told us that is very important is follow-up stories and the timing of when these stories are told. In my opinion, journalists who are interacting with traumatized people need to use practices that are trauma-informed. And a very important aspect of that would be to not approach someone in the immediate aftermath of their injury. A trauma-informed approach would be to wait, to allow that person to recover, and to ensure that your interaction with that person is not traumatizing them more. And the story will be different, right? The story of firearm injury survivorship is one of healing and recovery and resilience and strength. And all of those things should be included in the stories of gun violence.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess I'll get near the microphone. Thank you. Just a quick update. We just settled on the final cut of this film last week. It's, I think, 25 minutes altogether. It's a short documentary. And we're actually, I mean, among other things we're doing, trying to organize our distribution plan and raise funding to send everybody involved. Maybe Dr. Beard if she has time, but certainly Aronde and the other people in the film, and Yvonne, the filmmaker, off to film festivals and colleges and universities. So we'll be doing full-blown screenings soon, but we don't have a timeline yet. Okay, I should stop talking. Sometimes people have questions. I got excited and lost track of which hand went up first, but maybe over here. I'll come here next. Sorry.
She mentioned that sometimes the way gun violence is reported makes it worse. Could you elaborate on that?
Right. So that's based on the research, the interviews with the victims. But in terms of making it worse, in particular, that was the beat that I forgot while I was talking. That they said the reporting leads them feeling scared, hopeless, dehumanized, re-traumatized, a few other things. But there were less clear signals. They weren't the strongest signals, but there were some signals indicating that people who who feel harmed by this news reporting are more likely to acquire and carry a gun. And endless research shows when there are more guns, there will be more gun violence. So that's not as crystal clear, but it's in there. And somebody who researches with such rigor and speaks with such authority wouldn't have said that otherwise.
And then the statistics that went down that you showed on the right, does that have anything to do with a change in reporting?
So I'd like to think so, but I don't know. So I also have had the advantage to work with some of the nation's leading criminologists in two of the biggest programs underway over the past few years. And there's no consensus among researchers yet of why firearm violence went up during the pandemic. I mean, there's some obvious problems, right? I mean, there is all the emotional stress and all the political upheaval and all the economic stress of people who lost jobs. One other thing we know is that gun sales went through the roof like never before. So one can theorize why gun violence went up, and one can theorize why it came down. But there's and some organizations will be quick to claim credit, and that's just not reliable for us or anybody. I think we're moving the needle. I think if we were to quantify harmful reporting, I think we have the before research, and would have to do data collection another year. Anecdotally, I feel like it's getting better. But to prove that the improved reporting reduced violence, with so many moving pieces and so many initiatives, I don't know that we'll ever be able to prove that. But we will be able to prove that there's less harmful reporting, or I expect we will. I think I should say next.
Please approach PBS with your documentary. This is something that I think that PBS would be very interested in.
Thank you. So noted. WHYY Public Media in Philadelphia has been a great partner. PBS actually on our homepage there's also an interview. There's actually a report on addressing gun violence as a public health issue rather than through law enforcement and criminal justice. That PBS did it was an episode in a series a while ago, and they interviewed Dr. Beard. It's on the homepage. So we have an open line there.
I think you should push it.
Thank you. This is actually not my job, but I'll share your thoughts with Yvonne. Absolutely. Thank you.
After, like establishing programs and also, like websites like the Logan Project, has this caught any of the media's attention to report gun violence in a different way, or is the reporting on gun violence still the same?
So those are two questions. Have we got their interest and have we changed reporting? They're now making their interest clear. I'm not going to call them out, but the executive of one of the least approachable news organizations in Philadelphia a vice president of content came to our O&A panel. So from the beginning, we've had allies, people going, thank God you're doing this. It's exactly what I've been thinking. We meet mostly people in the middle who've been, I've been wondering if we're doing it the right way and I'd like to learn more. And we meet some resistors, people who think like I did in the 20th century. No, Jim, we observe and report and that's our whole job and leave us alone. You're making it harder. So we hear from all of them, but we're getting more engagement with news organizations locally and nationally. Has it changed the reporting? Like I said, anecdotally, I think so, but we're nowhere near actually saying that with any authority. It's going to take time. Research takes a long time.
I think my question is somewhat related. So we have a long-standing family-owned newspaper in the city that was recently sold to a, large news corporation. So I just wondered, have you had better success with those smaller companies? Is there hope that this large company won't be resistant to that kind of change?
So I'm a little bit out of my lane here, but I think the consensus is that all-in capital ownership hasn't been good for any news companies around the country. So it's going to be challenging. And again, I'm out of my lane, but not clueless. There are lots of other great things happening in journalism in terms of nonprofit journalism, journalism foundations raising money to support small independent journals. I think there are alternatives that could be helpful here. And hopefully we can all talk more about that. And then the other part of your question, in terms of who's who's most interested in this. I don't know that we've spotted a pattern. It's very personality driven. And I'm going to tell you a story because it will be in our. Oh, also there's a link to subscribe to our newsletter on our site, and there'll be a new edition tomorrow. And one of the briefs in there is about a guy whose name escapes me right now, who works for a TV station in Macon, Georgia, who just recently completed a journalism fellowship and launched a new project, basically changing the way they do everything to pretty much everything that we're advocating for. So I guess and I should learn more about this. I just read an article, and he took up this interest when his father was murdered. So, but all that to say, I'm going to say that our uptake, our engagement, our feedback is really personality driven, and it's coming from all sorts of news organizations. And I don't really know if it's coming from one type more than another. Yes, please.
It seems to me that one of the big problems, at least in our field, medicine field, is they're all in a hurry to get into print. And before they have the facts, they just want to get into print. And I could tell you the competition between the TV and the newspapers is great. If the newspaper knows the TV's got the byline, they don't want to cover it, and vice versa. So I think one of the root problems is this idea of the faster you get it in to print, the better it is.
And that's the journalist that I used to be. There's so many perverse incentives. I was just the best at this sort of harmful reporting. It's what I used to do. I was fast. As I said before, and people are doing it today with the best of intentions and clear belief that they're providing the best public service. But we have some different information now. And again, I'm out of my lane here, but I have read some articles and media news articles suggesting that this whole idea of breaking news, we got it first, is not that important to the audience. It's actually more important to the journalists. That people really want accurate information, useful information, more than they want anything quickly. And even if the fastest news was the best public service, there's a lot of misrepresentation in that, we're here for you. You can count on us. We're on top of this. And our study shows that half of the shootings don't get covered. So it's kind of a charade anyway. But none of that matters. Above all, we now know that it's harmful. We've documented that. You need the Code of Ethics of the Society of Professional Journalists. It actually says to minimize harm. It doesn't say first do no harm, that medical credo, but it says to minimize harm, which is an incredible responsibility. How much are you allowed to harm people to deliver a public service? Because there is a public service. We need to report on gun violence, but can we report on the issue, on the problem, and the solutions without causing harm, and with at least minimizing harm, which doesn't seem to be everybody's priority right now.
When I was growing up, big mantra for the newspapers was, if it bleeds, it leads. I don't know if that's still true. I think that's a component, and I guess I want to ask the question: if part of the project examines the prejudices of journalists, is that a part of it? We all seem to have some prejudice in some way, and sometimes unknowingly. And I think that often, unknowingly, a phrase is used or a word is used that should not be used at all. I don't know. I think that's part of my concern. And I don't condone crime, as you don't, as none of you do either, in any way. But I remember growing up when people of color committed some sort of crime. Full picture on page 3, long article. And if it was one who was not of that realm, it might be on page 6 or 7. I wonder if you'd respond to any of that.
Any of that. So we could probably organize a 15-week course on those questions alone, and certainly on the ethics of reporting on gun violence and prevention.
Usually short answers to most
Okay, short answers. If it bleeds, it leads. Still a cliche in some newsrooms. It got called out last year in a special, or year, maybe 2 years now, in a special report by the Philadelphia Inquirer, including an incredible video report. It turns out that this practice originated in Philadelphia with brands called Eyewitness News, unsurprisingly, right? Eyewitness News and Action News. And you know, branding is just one part of it, but CBS 3 in Philadelphia just dropped Eyewitness News a few months ago after 65 years following that Inquirer report. Well, changing the brand changed the practice? Well, I think lots of people are working on it, but it's not quite that simple either. What else? I mean, so placement in the paper, mugshots, perp walks, there are other people working on more broadly, actually, on improving coverage of criminal justice, law enforcement and criminal justice. We're laser focused on gun violence because that's our lane. But those other those other issues are critical as well. The Poynter Institute, which is a leading ethics institution in journalism, has a course underway. I'll be honest with you, I was taking it and I dropped it because I just took a new job on top of my other full-time job. But I got to audit it last year, and they're looking at these things more comprehensively than I am. What else? But I mean, the big picture is why everyone has biases, and we were just I was talking about this with Dean Alessio before. You know, I think obviously everybody has biases, and yet in the 20th century sort of tradition of journalism, I would say now we pretended we didn't. We had to report objectively, and we pretended that we didn't have biases. But you know what? The news, and still today, the newsrooms don't represent the cities, the communities they cover in cities like Philadelphia and probably anywhere. So you're really not going to get at the bias. I think, I mean, it's not an original idea, but an essential first step is diversity in the newsroom at all levels, and the industry doesn't do that very well. So that's something we're trying to address in and there are other organizations working on newsroom diversity, but we're trying to shift power from those in the newsrooms to those in the community, or share power, or you know, working in, you know, some call it co-creation to shift power. I don't know if I hit all of the beats, but those are all damn good questions, and that's a shorthand response, I think. Did I miss anything critical that you wanted? Okay, thank you. So if you're about to wrap it up, can I make a quick announcement?
I wasn't going to wrap it up, but go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay,
please.
if you have a question, please. I'm sorry. I've got time. I've got all the time you want. So thank you.
So my question is basically, I imagine the majority of the people in this room are consumers of media and newspapers, rather than producers. And do you have advice for us in how one ought to approach these articles? Is one part of the question, and the second part of the question is, what is our responsibility, I suppose, as consumers? How do we help solve this issue? It's kind of two big questions.
Yeah, no, and critical questions. Thank you. And so, you know, what can the consumer, like, what should the news consumer watch out for, and what can the news consumer do? The first is, you know, I have a sense that I've got a pretty well-informed group of people here, but to really consider news literacy, to understand what different news organizations do, and who they are, and who the people behind them are, and who the funders behind them are, and imagine their agendas. And then if you see something that doesn't feel honest or accurate or representative of something something your community or your area of expertise, challenge them. And the other thing is, I have different opinions sometimes, but a big question is what we should do. Should we engage people, try to bring everybody into the tent, share this new information? Other organizations with interests like ours do different things. They call people out, they give awards shaming them for doing the worst job at this or that. So what's the best strategy for change? What's the best way to implement this knowledge? Is something that I don't know that there's a consensus on. But one thing that I hear, and I should be transparent, I haven't worked full-time in a newsroom for 15 years, although I did for nearly 30. But I haven't worked full-time in a newsroom for 15 years. But what I hear from journalists now, maybe this represents how things have changed, but they think we're going to make less progress with criticism. And everybody, I mean, every individual that reaches them will have the most impact by reinforcing when they do a good job. So when they step up and do something, whatever it is, more in depth, more comprehensive, more accurate, let them know you feel that way. That's the signal we're getting. Oh, it's really not that exciting, but as long as you ask. These are just leftovers from that recent ONA conference, and I wish I had one for everybody, but for at least anybody who asked a question, at least, I could offer you a better gun violence reporting stress ball with a QR code that leads you to our homepage. So and if you're extras, everybody's welcome to have them. But it turns out that dealing, and we had 100, you saw all those people at our events. It turns out that using stress balls for marketing takes up a lot of space. I live in a tiny house in Philadelphia. So I'm interested in getting rid of them. If anybody would like one, and I'm also excited that it brings you to our homepage, and you can learn more about Aronde and Maxanne and Dr. Beard. And did I even say this? We've actually compensated 150 people who've worked with us during the first 3 years. Sometimes for credible messenger projects, sometimes for just attending a brainstorming session or workshop day, and lots of other people have come to our film festival. So we have a big network now. It's like bigger than me. It's not just me, but it is right now. And for today, I just want to say thank you. I'm incredibly grateful. I'm easy to reach if you want to stay in touch, if you have more questions. I've got some more time now, but until then, thank you so much for your time today.